this is something which David Stove, a philosopher, atheist philosopher, was highlighting in his book Darwinian Fairy Tales.
The discussion then moves on to sociobiology, which is the field of biology that aims to explain social behaviour in terms of evolution. He mentions the Australian philosopher David Stove, and in particular his criticism of sociobiology in his book Darwinian Fairy Tales. This book was criticised by biologists.
He called Darwinism a slander upon human beings. You mentioned hospitals. He said the hospitals is an example of why Darwinism, in its explanation of morality and human behavior, is absolute nonsense. Because a hospital is the survival of the unfittest being funded by the survival of the fittest, us giving taxes.
They then move on to a misunderstanding of the term survival of the fittest, which in biology means survival of the form that will leave the most copies of itself in successive generations. In social species such as humans, this can take the form of altruism, such as hospitals, which can lead to an overall increase in survivability.
Duties do not exist. There is no ontology here. So all you simply have is, as Richard Dawkins himself admits, rape being wrong is as subjective as the fact that we and contingent as the fact that we have 5 fingers rather than 4.
I have addressed this misquote about Richard Dawkins before. Here is the relevant video clip.
So I'm interested in asking about if morality is something that's evolved within us and was susceptible to similar arbitrariness. Is the fact that rape is wrong as arbitrary as the fact that we have 5 fingers instead of 6?
I don't think so, because I think, once again, rape causes suffering.
But then the fact that we experience suffering and the fact that we call that suffering is something that's evolved.
You're being too philosophical.
We could call something else.
Yeah. No, I mean, 6 fingers versus 4 fingers or 5 fingers is not a question where suffering arises.
There is censorship of people who come up with ideas which are anti-Darwinian or, say, pro-intelligent design. Even if you don't believe in intelligent design, you should agree that people have the right to actually put forward ideas that can challenge Darwinism.
What censorship are you talking about? Professor Michael Behe and Professor James Torr are able to keep their positions despite their support for intelligent design. Anybody can put forward ideas that challenge Darwinism. All they need to do is provide supporting evidence for that assertion.
We have laws to protect the critique of Darwinism. Why are there laws to make sure that this theory is taught? And why are there laws to protect it being critiqued?
There are no laws that protect the critique of Darwinism. I suspect your contention here is that there are laws against teaching intelligent design in school because it was decided that intelligent design is not science and therefore should not be taught in science class. Evolution is science and therefore should be taught in science class.
Why is it that people are penalized and sometimes lose their jobs for critiquing it?
This is another false assertion that is explained well here in this article. I will link it in the description.
Why is it that it is so difficult for even atheist biologists to come up with ideas challenging Darwinism?
Anybody is free to challenge Darwinism and come up with any mechanism they wish to propose. However, they have to provide sufficient evidence for this proposal. It is at this stage that they fail.
Jerry Fodor, he wrote the book What Darwin Got Wrong. He was groveling. I'm sorry, there's no other way to put it. He was groveling in the book, saying, I am an atheist. I'm a die-in-the-wool, atheist. I'm a card-carrying atheist. I'm critiquing Darwinism, but I don't believe in God. I don't believe in intelligent design.
This is the book by Jerry Fodor. There was no censorship, but it received a negative response from evolutionary biologists. Ahmed then reappears and discusses his recent debate with evolutionary biologists. I think he means this one here, which I will link in the description.
And he was just flat out there referring to the Lenski long-term evolution experiment, where E. coli evolved into metabolizing citrate, which it didn't when they starved it. And his whole argument was, look, this is a beneficial mutation. While when you look into the literature, you will find that essentially the system has moved part of the DNA purposefully into another part to consume the material that exists in the environment. There is no chance whatsoever there.
He didn't demonstrate in that debate or in this stream how he determined that it was moved purposefully, rather than through random mutation. There is no mention of what was in the literature.
And I will give specific examples. Number one, natural selection is completely sexual. It relates to reproductive success. So, for example, there is a syndrome that is among Jews, among Eastern European Jews, called Tay-Sachs. And Tay-Sachs is a dangerous neurological syndrome, and it causes plenty of problems. But the whole thing is, it causes those problems beyond the age of maturity. So somebody can get married and have many offsprings, and then maybe he's 30 or something, or beyond, after he has brought about kids, and it shows up. So natural selection is completely oblivious about it.
He is completely wrong about Tay-Sachs disease. The most common form is infantile Tay-Sachs disease, so it does not occur after the age of maturity. Thus, natural selection can affect it. As it is an autosomal recessive disease, 2 unaffected carriers can produce a child with this disease.
And then natural selection, by definition, the name is selection. So there has to be something to select from. So there is nothing new can come from natural selection.
Natural selection doesn't create anything new. It just selects what is favorable for survival. New traits are created through mutations.
One more thing, the reason I call it dumb is one of those allegations. For example, when the theory comes in the development of multicellularity. So unicellular life, they say unicellular life came into multicellular life. And they have no explanation for that. So they say, okay, what happened is that cells came together into colonies, and then individuals in the colonies started cooperating. Those individuals are just unicellular organisms. And then they started specializing, and then they became one organism, just like that. It's magic, okay? I laugh at this because no matter how many bees are cooperating, they do not become a big bee. They are still individual bees.
I had to check to see whether he was actually joking here. We have good ideas for how multicellular life began. Did he really think bees come together to make one giant bee like in the movies?
Another thing I liked very much when we were talking about extinction is that like 99.999 something of all creatures have gone away. And then when you look at the fossil record, and then when people are showing you those phylogenetic trees, which shows the ancestry that is claimed, I want anyone from the audience to open the internet and Google any phylogenetic tree for any creature that you can select on your own discretion. And I challenge you to find any lineage for any single creature that lives on Earth today that connects this modern creature to Luca, to the last universal common ancestor of all life, or even to the last universal eukaryotic ancestor.
Perhaps he's not aware that we can reconstruct a phylogenetic tree to Luca using the fossils and the genetic data. We have fossils like these stromatolites in Western Australia that are about 3.4 billion years ago. Estimates of Luca's age range from 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago.
Number one, the word selection is essentially what you've just said. It selects the best from what exists. And I have very big objections to the word natural, because natural selection is not natural. Natural selection is programmed in the very DNA of the creature.
If it's not natural, then what is it? Is it supernatural? How do you demonstrate that? Also, how do you know that it is pre-programmed rather than being selected for by the environment after being generated by random mutation?
I want to make a quick comment with Ahmed. So I think natural selection also, it is also a qualitative statement as well, right? Which a lot of people forget, because when you say it chooses the best, there's a decision process there clearly. So how is it deciding what is the best? It must have foreknowledge.
Absolutely.
Right? For an environment that hasn't come about yet.
Absolutely.
This has to be one of the dumbest displays of misunderstanding I have seen while analysing this whole series. There is no conscious choosing with full knowledge of the future. There is no conscious DNA molecule that is able to choose. Natural selection is the unguided process where better adapted members are more likely to survive and pass on their genes to their offspring.
And this is why I hate the fact that they call it natural. It has nothing to do actually with the environment.
It does have something to do with the environment because it is environmental factors such as food, living space, finding mates, escaping from predators, etc., that determine which organisms are more likely to survive and pass on their genes and which ones are less likely to.
And Richard Dawkins himself, in many interviews, he said this: I cannot explain how humans have intellect, poetry, and mathematics given natural selection. Because natural selection cares about somebody who runs fast from the tiger in the jungle. And you are claiming that we were essentially apes running from tigers in the jungle. Apes are very good by climbing trees and not very good at running fast. And guess what? Humans cannot climb trees. Humans are feeble and very weak compared to chimps. And it will not help you if I throw you tomorrow in the jungle that you can say poetry or do mathematics or solve differential equations when the tiger is coming at you.
This is another embarrassingly dumb statement. Humans can't run from the tiger or climb trees to escape, but we don't need to. We have brains that allow us to build and use tools to achieve our objective.
So it doesn't make any sense giving natural selection that humans look the way they are. Humans, according to natural selection, have to be as strong as chimpanzees, which are hugely stronger than us. And then natural selection can pick the chimpanzee that has better intellect. And the lecturer, who is miserably a Muslim, is saying, for example, look at some of the evidence for human-chimp ancestry, or humans are great apes, that, for example, vitamin C cannot be produced by the bodies of humans. And this is a common feature with some of the great apes.
Regarding vitamin C, humans and other great apes are not able to synthesize vitamin C due to a mutation in the relevant gene, turning it into a pseudogene. This is the same mutation in the same gene across all the great apes, providing strong evidence for common ancestry. Creationists retort that guinea pigs also aren't able to synthesize vitamin C, but in this case it is due to a different mutation.
And then yesterday I was discussing novelty. It was about novelty. Can the Darwinian mechanism and even modern synthesis and the extended modern synthesis, can it justify novelty? And then I am telling him, you cannot justify novelty. Where will the genes come from? And the explanation in the theory is that there is this intergenic genes that are genes that have no value, that are between other genes, and though they just change randomly and just voila, with magic, they become functional genes. How ridiculous.
It's not ridiculous at all. We have examples of new genes arising from non-coding sections through mutations, creating new proteins. Here's one. I will link it in the description.
But then when you want to justify novelty, again, you will refer to intergenic genetic material, which is junk DNA by definition. Otherwise, if it's not junk and it gets so messed up to the extent it becomes completely new genes, how come did natural selection let it go? If you mess up that much genes, it is lethal to any organism to have even 1% mutation in his genome. We will kill any organism.
Where is your evidence that this level of mutation will kill an organism? Natural selection removes deleterious traits. The more deleterious, the quicker it is removed. Most mutations are neutral, so there is no selection pressure to remove them. This is why the remnants of endogenous retroviruses remain, and why junk DNA is retained in the genome.
Okay? But let me give you this surprise. Maybe somebody will say, maybe this happened so far away to the extent that, for example, at that time there were so much junk DNA. I put it in front of him. According to very late recent studies, I picked this up from a conference in 2015, evolutionary biologists were talking, where very serious studies have identified 1,700, that's 1,700 and something, maybe 34, genes in the Homo sapiens species specifically, that have no homologs whatsoever. You cannot trace them to even the hypothetical common ancestor with great apes. 1,700 genes. Luca, the common ancestor of life, according to the theory, had a total of 335 genes altogether. So what is this? You are telling me that within 6 million years, For the human being to be a better creature, or to be this creature that it is this marvelous creature, 8%, because the human beings are estimated to have like 20,000 genes, some from 20 to 25, 8% of its genes have been destroyed.
He seems a bit confused here. There are 1,639 genes which function as human transcription factors. I think this is where he got his 1,700 genes from. This is indeed about 8% of the human total number of genes of about 20,500. I'm not sure why he says they've been destroyed. These are human-specific genes which code for differences between humans and chimpanzees that are thought to predominantly affect brain size, as it is in this area that humans differ from chimpanzees. 6 million years is plenty of time for these new genes to evolve.
Maybe Luca came from space and he went back to spec, brother Ahmed. What do you think of that?
Yeah, and somebody threw that at me at a point, and when those guys they say this, maybe genetic material came into on an asteroid. So I asked him this question: do you know what is the re-entry temperature of an asteroid? An asteroid goes up because that's why it burns. Okay, the temperature of an asteroid goes up to almost 1,500 degrees centigrade during atmospheric re-entry. Okay. Do you expect that if there is genetic material on any asteroid, that it will survive?
So he thinks the genetic material on asteroids can't survive the heat of entry into the Earth's atmosphere. He obviously hasn't heard of the Murchison meteorite which landed in Australia. This contains plenty of organic matter, such as amino acids, which are the building blocks of genetic material. There were no further relevant points made in the stream. This video is the third and final response video to this Dawahwise series. Thank you for watching, and please let me know what you think in the comment section.